Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions. I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Lynda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area, and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. This week in the news, Susan will join me to answer a question from a listener, Andrew from Oregon. And it's a question, but it's really more of a thoughtful comment that Andrew makes. And he asks us if we can comment on his comment, which, by the way, we kind of liked. So you can do that if you want. You have a comment you want to send in and you want our opinion on your comment, that kind of works. So Susan and I do that. Then we have a brand new interview, and it's another book, and it's Lisa and Lynda. They've co-written a book entitled The Calm College Method, subtitle, A Stress-Free Guide to College Admissions for Parents and Students. I've read the book. I'm very excited about the book. You know, originally, and I said to Lisa and Lynda, yeah, why don't you come on? Let's have a 15-minute conversation. But after reading the book, I said, no. We need to do longer than that. So we have a 40-minute conversation. It's spread out over 2 weeks. They get into why they wrote the book, what they cover in the book, who the book is good for. So you'll hear that each of the next 2 Thursdays. And then we'll have part 2 of 3 of my interview with Susan Brisson, the Director of Admission at Olin College of Engineering in Needham, Massachusetts. Friends, let's transition now and hear from Lisa and Lynda about their brand new college admissions book.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, you're about to hear a 2-part interview with Lisa and Lynda. And in part 1, Lisa explains why she decided to write the book, The Calm College Method. And she shares why she asked Lynda to co-author it with her. Lynda explains what Lisa and Lynda feel is the biggest misperception when it comes to college admissions. Lisa and I discussed George Herbert Cooley, the sociologist's theory of the looking glass self and how that relates to college admissions. Lisa explains what the stressors are out there that can start as early as middle school. Lisa gives advice to a student who is feeling a lot of peer pressure. Lisa talks about how families need to focus on process goals, and she explains to us what process goals are. Lynda answers the question, what would you say to a family that says, focusing on process goals won't get me the results I'm looking for? And finally, Lisa and Lynda explained why process goals are more rigorous, in a more rigorous way to approach the college admission process. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm very stoked about today. I'm here with Lynda and Lisa. Hey, Lynda. Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
And I'm very excited because they have a brand new book. And I actually just finished reading it. I'm really excited about it. And so we're going to talk about it today. But before we get into some of the specifics, as someone who's written a book, I know that it takes a lot of passion to write a book. When I wrote mine, I was up till 4 a.m. for like 8 months in a row. Of course, I do that every day. But
yeah, I mean, life is normal for you.
Yeah, Lisa's thinking, what's the big deal? But talk a little bit about like where the passion for the book came from.
Yeah, well, Mark, really, you were the inspiration of this book, right? Because I think around this time last year, you and I had a meeting. You said, Lisa, I have a great idea for you. And you said, you need to write a book, something about psychology and college counseling. And I was like, I maybe could actually do that. And so it's really all because of you. You were the inspiration. And so thank you for that. But I started kind of just like looking at it from the perspective of a presentation that Lynda and I gave at the Southern Association of College Counseling a couple years back, and realized that there were elements of that that could really be expanded upon and turned into a book. And so obviously I was not going to do all that by myself, since Lynda and I wrote that together. So I, begged Lynda to participate in the book project, and we did it. And I think, you know, I was not up until 4 a.m. writing this book. I don't know about you, Lynda.
Well, for sure, I wasn't up until 4. And I don't remember any begging going on. Lisa had that idea, and I was like, oh, all right. I would not have tackled it on my own. And it did originate, with Mark, and we kind of sat back, and a lot of it is just kind of putting into words what we were already doing, and how we counsel families to begin with. So for me, it was a lot of mid-afternoon kind of spa music playing in the background. No late nights, early mornings.
Yeah, and it's a book that you can't write without some experience. Like, I think if you would have just tried to write this 7 years ago, it would have been really different, right? Like, it's birthed out of what you experience in the counseling room, what you hear from families, what you see are their stressors, and all of that. So we're going to get into the book. Why don't you say the name of the book, which we haven't even said yet, and then why don't you take on the question from your experience with families? What do you see as the biggest misconceptions parents have about college admissions?
Well, the fact that we haven't actually mentioned the book name yet tells you how awesome we are at marketing.
Yeah, we are such whizzes, Yeah.
Probably not our strong suit, but it's the CALM college method. So biggest misconception, and I think what we experience is that families, students, parents see college admissions as a referendum on their worth. Students, and I know we're all getting this time of year, like, so-and-so got into this school. Why didn't I apply ED to that school? I had better test scores than them. And they think it's all about them. And then for parents, they see it as a reflection on their parenting skills. If they don't have the right bumper sticker or sweatshirt, what does that say about them as a parent? And then, Mark, you have said this a lot. Students and families don't understand what the competition is like out there. And I see that all of the time. And it doesn't really, I don't see a geographical change, because here in the Midwest, students, are surprised, like, oh my goodness, how is UIUC so competitive? And it's like, yeah. So I don't think they understand what the competition is like, or how competitive schools have gotten in the past 5 or 6 years, for a host of reasons. So those may be some of the biggest misconceptions that families come to the process.
One of the things I liked that you had in your book was you had the 1998 acceptance rates for schools versus 2024. And that's so good. And I think a lot of parents are probably around 98 is kind of around the time they were going or looking. And, I was really happy you put that in. And obviously one that stood out was University of Chicago, like 61% down to like 3.8.
It's crazy.
Right? And like a lot of people are thinking that way. I think the thing that's really challenging, and probably the single biggest thing I remember academically from my 4 years at Michigan State in the 80s, was learning about George Herbert Cooley, a renowned sociologist, looking glass self concept. And basically it says that the most significant people in our life form mirrors. And we look into that mirror, and what those significant people tell us about ourselves, that becomes our self-image. So if the 5 most significant people are telling you, boy, you got some big, ugly ass ears, then you're probably going to...
Wow, you need to change your 5 significant people.
You're probably going to like go through life thinking about your big ears, you know? And,
True.
And so that gets really hard when it gets applied to this context, because if the 5 people are telling you you're not successful if you don't go to name brand university, then it just puts enormous pressure on people that I have to be successful, because at the end of the day, we kind of all clamor respect. And so that's what I think makes this process so hard, is it's not just simply a matter of saying, well, don't think that way, because like if that's what the significant people around you are telling you is important, I think it's pretty hard for that not to seep into your thinking. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that you bring up a great point. And then that's why we wanted to write this book, actually, to educate parents, because parents are probably like 2 to what, if you have some step parents or whatever, 4 of your most significant people in your life. And if your parents have the underlying belief that there are only a certain number of schools that are good for you to go to, and if you don't go to that, you're going to have real problems, then that is really hard on kids. And so we wanted to try to open people's minds to all the different options that are out there, and look at this in a different way, and prioritize the child's mental health over, their self-image, I guess you might say.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you guys do a really, really good job in doing it. I want to share at the end some of my thoughts about the book. I'm very excited about this book. I have some very thoughts in mind about who this could really be helpful for, but I'm going to hold my tongue until the end. So, but I know what Lisa and Lynda are thinking. Yeah, right. You want to bet?
You can do it. I have faith in you.
Yes, I have faith too, Mark.
So you argue that college stress can start before the application season. What does that stress look like? Well, let's say there's a parent out there and they're listening, can you help me? What are the clues? What are the cues? What would you say to that?
Honestly, I think even in middle school, you can see parents starting to stress about the comparison game. This kid is got all A's. This kid is a solo at the band concert. This kid is the fastest runner. My kid isn't. What is this going to look like in times when they go to apply to college? And I think, as parents, like, often feel a pressure to like get everything just right. Like if you have the right classes, the right extracurriculars, the right summer programs, then somehow that is going to lead on a path to success, like a conveyor belt. And, like students, like maybe no one is saying it out loud, but, I find that people really pick up on their parents' anxieties and issues without ever being told, and they internalize them without ever having anyone saying it to them. It's kind of remarkable and, frightening in a way. But so, if you are really stressed about this, then your child might start to internalize that, and they start worrying about that. And then if you've been doing this for 5 years, by the time you get to senior year, like you guys are all like just tired, fatigued, stressed out. And, you may not have the cognitive flexibility to look at a lot of different options by that point. You've been so narrowly pursuing a certain goal and sacrificing so much of your family life, time, and finances to, try to achieve that goal. Like other options, it's almost like they don't exist. Like you can't see them. You're so invested in that one track.
Yeah. And the thing that's really hard, sure, parents play a really big role in this process. Kids never stop wanting to please their parents. There's a lot of truth to something Rick Clark from Georgia Tech has said, which I like to quote. He says, kids don't shed tears in this process because they didn't get in. They shed tears because they feel they let their parents down. But there is another side to that. I have worked with many, and I know you guys have as well, many, many, many parents over the years that feel exactly like both of you do. I do. I'd say everyone on our podcast team, which is, fit and match matters more over rankings and prestige. We all feel that way. And I have met many parents. I'm working with a really good chunk right now. They feel very, very strongly about that, but they're like, where's my kid getting this from? And the other thing that is really powerful is that peer group.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, like, so much so to the point where, like, when we moved to Atlanta, I kind of knew all of the leading independent school directors from sort of being in this work. And a lot of them were surprised, like, the school that we picked for our kids was not sort of the she schools that everybody was clamoring. And it was a big part of it is I didn't want to put my kids into that crucible, and because of the power of peers. So, we looked for something that had all the excellence we wanted, but without that mindset that if you don't go to a certain kind of school, you're a loser. So what's your advice to a parent that completely buys into everything you're saying, but the peer group is sending a different message and they're pulling their hair out? Because I encounter that a fair amount.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I can speak to that, both as a counselor and a parent, because my kids are in one of those environments that are sort of the pressure cooker, status conscious environments. And so, I have tried from an early age and, with Sonia, my middle daughter, who was a senior this year, to kind of like, I just repeatedly said, this doesn't matter. Status doesn't matter. Don't worry about getting into Harvard, Princeton, Yale. And just kind of trying to inoculate her against that pressure. And I, probably talked about it way too much. I'm sure she would tell you, like, that I did. And, even like when we got access to like SCORE, which has those scattergrams, of just sitting down with her and showing her like how many people in your school actually get into these schools, and what kind of qualifications do they have, and what are the rest of people doing? And trying to put reality about it with facts. But it's daunting. Thomas is in 8th grade and they are starting the high school transition process. And I keep telling Lynda, like, oh, I can't do this again. I don't have the emotional strength to go through this again.
2 down, 1 to go.
I will do it. But, luckily Thomas, I think he's been around this enough that he's already heard. He's been sitting at the same dinner table. He's already heard a lot of this. So hopefully he will already have a head start on his sisters in terms of trying to do that. But I think you just have to be very explicit about that a lot.
Yeah. And there's so much coming at our kids that any tools we can give them to help, I'm going to get excited about. And I feel like your book is one of those tools. I did a session with the family, and they're going to hear this because they listen to this podcast. And I love the transparency of the student. Like, he'd completed his questionnaire, and all over that questionnaire, prestige, rankings, like just jumping off the page, right? And I saw a problem. One, I saw what the family was willing to pay versus what the costs of those schools would be, and they weren't going to get need-based aid. And those kinds of schools don't give merit money. So there was a problem immediately. But I started talking to him, and I said, and by the way, this was an example because the parents were not of that perspective. So we kind of have an issue here. You and your parents are not on the same page on prestige at all. So I said, why is prestige so important to you? And I just loved his answer because it was so honest. He said the first thing, he said was, well, I'm around a lot of people that think that way, and I'm sure that thinking is rubbing off on me. So I'm like, A, for honesty and self-reflection. And then he said, and the second thing, I think there's a part of me in the back of my mind that feels like if I don't go to one of those schools, I'm not going to have the career success that I want to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Once again, great honesty. So I'm always thankful for these tools. Now, it really happened in this case, it was good because he's very intent on being a lawyer. And so what I did was I pulled right up, you've seen these, the Harvard and Yale's list of where Harvard and Yale students went to undergrad. And he was shocked. I mean, he's seen schools on there that admit more than 90% of kids. And then I was like, do you think this helped change your thinking? And he was like, yeah, it really did. So like there are tools that can help, right? But we need all the tools in our arsenal. And I feel really confident that your book is one of those tools. So let's keep diving into this. So if families move away from prestige as a primary goal, what should they focus on?
Yeah. That's where, we really emphasized process goals in this book. So, I mean, probably if you did like a search on this book of the most commonly used words, process goals would be the number one. And what a process goal is when you are just focusing on the things that you can control. And a lot of this comes from sports psychology, actually. So let's take the example of a tennis player, right? A tennis player, they play a match, one person wins, one person loses. That happens every single match. And there's a lot of different conditions that are going on in that match, right? Like somebody could be sick that day. The sun could be in your eyes, the wind, you could have a bad ref. Like there's all kinds of factors that could affect the outcome of that tennis match. So if you judge yourself purely on that, then you are judging yourself on a lot of factors that you have no control over. Now, conversely, if you say, I'm not going to focus on whether I win or lose that tennis match, I am going to focus on my preparation and how well I prepare for the tennis match. That is something you can absolutely do. Okay, I'm going to play with the ball machine 2 times a week. I'm going to meet with my coach. I'm going to do, some like tennis supporting strength workouts. I'm going to, go to the clinic, whatever those goals are. Then if you can focus on that, then you are successful no matter what happens in the match. And that is something that we try to apply to college counseling and to college applications.
So what would you say to the parents who are really worried that to stay calm, focus on process? It sounds good, but all it's going to do is lower expectations, and it's going to not end up with positive results. What would you say to that family?
Well, I'll let you go, Lynda.
Well, I had this conversation just yesterday, and it's really about managing expectations. So if your expectations are that your student is going to go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, we probably need to manage those and talk about reframe it. What is really most important? And we spend a lot of time on that. Because how do you know what a good fit school is if you don't identify your priorities? And then all of a sudden your priorities become your expectations. My expectation is that I go to a great school that will get me to Harvard Law School. Well, like you just mentioned, there are a whole bunch of schools that can do that. So managing those expectations, and I should say reframing what those expectations should be.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that, I actually think doing a process goals approach to college application is much more rigorous and is more likely to result in better outcomes because you are focusing on doing every step of the process well, every step of the process on time, and every step of the process in a thoughtful way. And in sports psychology, what they find is athletes who just focus on process have much better records, or they win more, or they have better performance than those who focus on outcomes. So there is a lot of evidence that suggests that this is actually a way to become more successful.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that going through the process goals is easier because I think, applying to the top 10 schools, that's hitting the easy button. It's not necessarily going to make things better. You really need to go through the process and identify priorities, do your research, and build that list. That takes a lot more time than just picking up a magazine that's got a bunch of rankings in it.
One of the things I was thinking the whole time I was reading this book is, have either of you read Dr. Ed Hallowell's book, The Childhood Roots of Adult Happiness? Have either of you read that? You guys have to read that. I'm giving you a new assignment now, Lisa.
All right.
This one doesn't
that'll be 2026 project, right?
Yes. So when I was reading your book, I felt this is the Dr. Hallowell's approach to college counseling. So Dr. Hallowell was chair of the psychiatry department at Harvard for lots of years. He's a prolific writer and conference speaker. And when I was at Westtown School, every year we would bring at least one sort of top-notch professional development person in for like a whole day of conferencing with the faculty. So we had Hallowell in, and we had to read his book in preparation. So basically what he talks about in his book is that I'm sitting here, I'm at Harvard University, and we have students that are on suicide watch because they're not number one in their class. And he says, we are teaching our kids this pyramid view, that there can only be one person on top. And if you're not number one, you're a loser. So I've got kids on suicide watch in Harvard because they're not number one in their class. And so he turns the whole thing upside down, and he advocates for a view where everybody can be a winner. And the way everybody is a winner is it starts at a really young age. You watch how your kid plays. And he says, by watching how your kid plays, you're getting a cue as to what they love and what they're good at. And almost all forms of play can be actually turned into a job. And then they can do something they love that's meaningful to them. They're happier, they're healthier. There's multiple winners. So like you think of the pyramid, instead of the person at the top, it's like the big base at the bottom. And like, that's what I felt like your book was saying, right? It was like the Hallowell approach. Like everybody can be a winner if they focus on the right process and they define success for them. And success is not just defined by the prestige of the school, but whether a kid is going along their path that they're meant to go on and that they would find rewarding and fulfilling. Does that make sense? You see why I want you to read the book?
Yeah, no, definitely need to read the book. And I think that you're absolutely right, because what we want, part of the process goals of applying is to really have the student to have more self-insight and awareness of what they like, what they're good at. And that's like an extremely valuable thing to take into the rest of your life. Rather, if you're just focused on the, T20 from U.S. News and World Report, you're not learning very much about yourself at all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Friends, this concludes part 1 of Lisa and Lynda's interview on the Comp College Method. We hope you join us next week for the final part. Okay, friends, let's transition. Andrew from Oregon sent in a very thoughtful comment. He asked for Susan and I to comment on it, and that's what we do.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Susan, we had an interesting, very insightful comment that was left from a listener. And it was interesting because he shared his view on some things and he asked for our opinion of his thoughts, which is actually not a bad idea if somebody wants to do that. It's a kind of a indirect way of asking a question. I'm going to play the question and then get your thoughts.
Mark and company, this is Andrew from Oregon. I'm a huge fan of what you do. We personally canceled our $10,000 per year advisor for our son when we realized we were getting far better information from you all. So thank you for what you do for everyone. But I do have a comment that I appreciate your insights on. I've been listening to recent episodes where you've talked about the stress, the application process on kids and parents, and of how after that process, so many top graduates end up in just 3 professions: finance, tech, and consulting. Obviously, there are a lot of potential explanations, but compared to when I applied to college, I see a couple of main causes. First, the Common App means students are applying to more colleges, which reduces acceptance rates and ups the stress. But second, this is happening amidst grade inflation, both GPAs and SAT scores. This means the students think they can't be anything less than perfect. And near perfect GPAs and SAT scores make extracurriculars the deciding factor. It's not just that these are skewed to the rich, which they obviously are. It's that they're subjective. So a student can never know if they've done enough. It's hard for students not to conclude that colleges are judging them as a human being when that's in fact what they are doing. It's not enough to just be a good student. You have to be young Mahatma Gandhi. Almost no students actually are this way, but we're teaching them to pretend on their applications. It's forced hypocrisy. I'm not saying this is what leads all those kids whose applications said they wanted to end malaria in Africa to end up in management consulting, but it can't help. I got into Middlebury with a 1400 SAT and B's in honors classes. My high school valedictorian went to Chicago, but even he didn't have a straight 4.0. Neither did the kids who went to Brown or Duke or Penn or Dartmouth or Swarthmore or other top schools. Tougher grading standards for GPAs and SATs actually made life easier because you knew you couldn't be perfect, but also you didn't need to be perfect. What's interesting is that the colleges themselves weren't the main players in creating these problems. As Mark has pointed out, GPA inflation comes largely from affluent high schools responding to parental pressures. And it was the College Board that recentered the SAT several times over the years. If we simply restored GPA and SAT standards and admissions relied more on them and less on outlandish extracurriculars or essays, high schoolers would know what it takes to be admitted. Just be a really strong student and a decent person. With your spare time, go to a football game, go on a date, play your musical instrument, not for a competition, but just for fun. Let's let kids be kids. Thank you very much.
Where do you want to take this one, Susan?
Oh, Andrew, hard question. I feel your pain.
Yeah.
I love how you presented your very strong feelings on this issue. And I guess the best that I'm going to be able to do is use my experience having read applications for a variety of selective colleges and also worked with an enormous variety of kids and families as a college counselor, as has Mark. The first thing I feel like I need to say is extracurricular activities are never the deciding factor unless you are a recruit. So that is just the cold, hard truth that a plate full of extracurricular activities is going to be respected, but it's more important to a college what that predicts the student is going to do and the kind of kid they're going to be on the college campus than the quantity or anything in particular, unless they are a recruit. Now, when I say recruit, everybody immediately thinks of athletics, and that's certainly a big chunk of that. That if you are elite, and you rise to whatever level it is, a particular college, depending on its division and its blah, blah, but also its needs. I mean, you can be the best offensive soccer player on your high school team. You can be all league, all county, all state. And if a particular college is overloaded with offensive players, you're not going to get the points to become a recruit. I mean, you might sit on the bench for a while until there's room for you to play. But there's a lot more in that. There's talent, but then there's also the need of an institution. I've told Mark over the years stories I've had, when we worked at the same school together, and the Yale admissions person who said to me that my all-state soprano, who was headed for all USA, at that level, was not getting any points for that because they were essentially a dime a dozen. And I'm like, really? Are you kidding me? And he was embarrassed, but he said, you have to understand what we see in our applicant pool. Anyway, so it's to get the talent or the recruit value with your extracurriculars, you have to be at a certain level of talent, but also then you have to be needed by that particular institution. That's why some athletes are recruited by some college coaches and not by others. It's a question of what do we need? So recruits are also in a lot of other areas in terms of campus life. They can be debaters. They can be marching band. They can be drama. It depends on the institution and what the institution offers and what they're good at. If Oberlin is looking at a bassoonist, their standard for a recruit is going to be different than, Haverford College here in the Philadelphia area, where you've got a different level of accomplishment and professional ambition in a program. So I'm just saying that there are recruits where talent does carry the admissions decision. I mean, in terms of an extracurricular, the student has to be able to do the work at the institution in order for the talent hook to carry them over, but they don't necessarily have to be in the top of the applicant pool. They can be a lot lower, but they have to be qualified to do the work. The same, I would say, is for other VIP categories that are not connected to extracurriculars, but might be connected to connections or other things. Another topic. When a student loads their extracurricular schedule with a million and one different things, colleges immediately look for themes. Are we looking at a student who's going to be an activist on our campus? Do we value activism? Do we need more activists? Is the student going to be a leader? Do we value leadership? Do we need more leaders? And on it goes. Again, Mark and I often talk about the importance of reading mission statements and value statements that colleges publish on their website, because that's where they disclose what they value. They don't let you know what they need more of necessarily, right? It's not the recruitment plan, but the admissions recruitment plan is rooted in the institutional values and priorities and preferences that impact the ratings that readers assign reflect those priorities and preferences. When we see a jam-packed extracurricular profile, it's themes we look for, meaning what is this kid? What's their superpower? Is it just being busy? Is it because they want to boss other people around? Where are they proving to be an inspiration? And admissions people sometimes talk about these words that start with the letter I, that in ninth grade, they want to see, what is the kid interested in? What are they experimenting with? What are they trying out in their high school? That I becomes involvement. 10th grade, what are they plugging into? They're having to start making choices. So if they're making a commitment to Model UN, they may not be aiming at being a varsity athlete or the president of the student government, right? They're probably starting to say, I can see the time commitment here. And if I'm going to rise to the top of this particular activity, I may need to make some choices, or I'm content being a generalist and kind of leading from the middle, if you put it that way, being a member, but not the leader. The I then becomes initiative. And that's what colleges start to look for as the student moves through the junior year, is where are they breaking the mold? Are they simply fitting into a pre-established position and carrying on whatever it is? Or are they looking at National Honor Society or the Science Olympiad through new eyes? I read a wonderful essay last year about a student who got involved in a competitive science or math team. I forget which one it was. And they were appalled that the club wasn't doing anything to bring along middle schoolers. And their club was too small to be truly competitive, but it was a bunch of brainiacs who were happy hanging out with other brainiacs. And he decided that what they needed to be doing was coaching the math club at the local middle school to get those kids excited and prepped to move into this competitive program early in their high school career so that they could start a wave of growth and enthusiasm. It was just awesome. It was just awesome. The I then from initiative turns into impact. And impact is the changes, the legacy, how people describe the style of leadership and engagement. And this pattern of these I words are very hard. It's very hard to achieve when you are overextended, because each level requires more time and more generosity of your spirit as a teenager to inspire and bring along others. Inspire being the fifth. And that's the character word, is how do teachers describe this teenager in terms of the effect that they have on others. And it's not just that you have 5 Best Delegate awards. That can be very nice if you're looking to be a debater on the college level. But it's what people have to say and what you have to say about yourself too, and where your reward comes from. So it's kind of a long litany, but this is what I've learned through reading and all of our networking, Mark, with admissions people. We hear it in the interviews. Practically every admissions person you talk to, how they're looking for not just a resume, but a representation. And those are the 2 words that I would say to Andrew that really distinguish the resume presentation of an application, which is a litany of accomplishments. It's the perfectionist approach. It's the look at what I've done. And then an application that is representational, multidimensional. It's character, it's accomplishment, but it's self-awareness and an understanding of even as a teenager, I'm beginning to see where I can make a difference. I'm understanding myself, and I'm going to college with a better understanding of the person I want to be, what I want to get involved in, and how I want to impact my new community. So that's my rebuttal a little bit to the you only get in if you're doing it all and doing it at a very high level. Less is more. And I've read enough applications that I feel that I can say that.
No, Susan, that was great. And I've been wanting you to walk through the 5 I's on here. We've never actually done that before with that level of depth. That was great. So let me say, Andrew, there are a few things you said that I really liked a lot. First of all, I'm really glad that you went and shared your 1,400 in B's and honors class in Middlebury and valedictorians getting into U Chicago without perfect grades. Not everybody knows that. Some people are new to this country and they haven't gone through this experience. And people really do need to know how much things have changed. Susan, you remember when 1,400 was a good enough SAT score for so many of the Ivy League schools.
Absolutely.
If you had the other things that they wanted. I mean, in fact, one of my clients I have right now says my 1,400 got me into Harvard. I mean, not, she says got me, and obviously we know it's more than just the test score. And you know what I mean? Like, it was just a different day. So I appreciated you doing that. I really appreciated you pointing out the role of the Common App and really just the internet and the ease of applications has played in some of this frenzy. I think that's very important. There's no doubt about it. The ease of which you can apply now. You could have pointed out other things, the role the rankings has played and the fixation on people feeling they need to go to a T20 school. There's other things that have played a role in here. I appreciate what you said about grade inflation, but maybe from a different angle than you came at it. So there is a regular listener of our podcast who's probably did a cartwheel when you said that out of joy. This is a professor at a very prestigious single-digit admit rate school who also has a business. And he feels very, very strongly that grade inflation is creating a lot of problems, including not creating resilient kids who are used to perfection. And he feels like we would be much better served by not giving out so many A's. And so you can make a strong argument that we're teaching bad lessons with the grade inflation we're having and how it leads to perfectionism and a number of things. I think there's a lot there. I think the one thing that I would have a slightly different perspective on, I don't think the biggest problem is just the grade inflation is pushing kids to extracurriculars. It's the supply demand issue, right? I oftentimes use the example of you're trying to get on a highway that can handle 20 cars, but there's 300 cars trying to get on the highway at the same time. And once you drive the admit rates down to such low levels, it does put the colleges in a position where they can be incredibly persnickety. So I just feel like if we had what you said with grades, it's still going to have the stress because of the low admit rate and people wanting to go to these schools that have such low admit rates. And then I do layer that with what Susan said. Although, and I don't pretend you were saying that you have to do more activities as a way of getting in. I'm not sure if I heard that, but Susan's point is very well taken. It is so much more than your activities that's going to play a role in who ultimately gets in to the institution, and including, what are the needs of the institution and what is the perception that you'll come in here and make a big splash and be someone who will be a big contributor here and for 60 years more as an alumni.
That's right.
Out there. So I think as long as you have the imbalance with supply and demand, you're going to have the frenzy. And even if I do see great value in not having so much grade inflation. At the same time, I think those of us who have read files are not a big fans on making it all about just grades either, in terms of who we admit. I was not surprised. I'm sure Susan, that Indiana Kelley, their business school, went away from just admitting kids by GPA and test scores. They were one of the few selective places that were doing that. And a lot of people asked me why they made the change. Well, you can get a lot of knuckleheads with the 3.8 and a 1380 or whatever. And then you get there and you're like, I don't want this kid's character in my classroom.
Right.
And so I'm not a fan of just making decisions just off academic criteria, because I don't think that makes the best community. I feel very strongly about that. So I loved your message. It really made me think, and there was a lot of food there. Oh, and Susan and I got a crack out of, we're glad we saved you $10,000 a year off your college counselor. We're happy for that.
Well, one thing too that I think Andrew would be interested in is, in the last couple of years, some colleges have started adding quirky personal questions that are clearly not evaluative, but more, and the colleges are frank in the instructions. They say this is not evaluative. It's our way to try and get more of a sense of who you are.
Yeah, Maryland does that.
Yeah, and of course, there's some biggies out there that have been doing it for a while. But, when I work with students and understand, because the kids are like, OMG, I'm going to blow it right here because I'm not going to sound like the coolest roommate in the world. And you got to really shake up a teenager to get them out of that. I'm being judged on, my favorite comic book, or, what flavor of ramen I like, things like that. A lot of it sounds bizarre, but when you pull back and you look at an application holistically, those sections can add what I call color. And they can reveal a little bit about a student's humor, thoughtfulness, sensibilities. And it's not going to be a plus or minus point system, but when kids spend some time on those questions, it can be colorful. I wish I could think of another word, but sometimes those colors in an application get squeezed out by the perfectionist tendencies. The voice, the color, the energy literally gets squeezed out, and you're left with what looks like a sample application from some adult who tried to create the perfect application. I swear. And kids become a lot less interesting because they've misplaced their personal voice in there. And I just wanted to say that to Andrew, that I loved what he said about, can't they just be, decent kids and have some fun? And that's actually Decency and fun and collegiality are what these questions are trying to get at. If you see them, Stanford, Maryland, there are others I can't.
Yeah.
But that's what they're desperately trying to get kids to put back into the applications.
You know, Susan, I was just thinking, I want us to do a panel discussion, pull together some people on our team, you know, who's available, and kind of talk about some of the commonalities we see of kids that get into the most selective schools. Like you covered it a decently with what you said there, but there's a lot more we can say because, you know, I feel for kids. How many kids do we have that come to us that are 4.0, very good rigor, strong testing, and they're good kids? Their writing is fine. We don't actually see the actual teacher recs, but there's no reason to believe that these are not kids that are going to get positive recs.
Of course.
And that these kids are so disappointed when they ED and they don't get in Brown or Columbia and you see it all the time. And
you're describing the standard strong phenomenon.
Correct. And that it's so common. And, you know, I want us to be able to have a conversation. And it's hard because I don't want to discourage people. But at the same time, it's more discouraging if you're surprised that happens to you and you get a whole bunch of, you know, denials at admission. I'd much rather people understand it and understand what are some legitimate things that they can do authentically to differentiate themselves. So they don't, because one thing, I mean, the Yale rep was right. Like when you're on the other end, they're seeing their pool. And the pool is ridiculous at some of these places for small numbers of spots. And some cases, the answer, honestly, is you need to broaden your listing. You need to get off of the mindset that there's only whatever you think, 10 good schools, 20 good schools, 30 good schools. Sometimes that literally is the answer, you know. But sometimes it can be maybe you're misdirecting some of your energy into things that you think are really going to be important, such as volume of activities with little depth and distinguishment. And you could be building some of those themes as you talked about. And there's ways it can be done with authenticity. And I think that we need to do something on that just to give people some pointers, because anytime you encounter so much disillusionment in the counseling room, it indicates that there's an opportunity for teaching there. You know, so let's plan on doing that. I'm publicly making that commitment right here, and I'll see who's available on our team to do a panel discussion on this. I think it could be something that could be helpful to some students. Yeah.
Well, I think Andrew asked a question that, you know, is on a lot of people's minds.
Oh no, and Andrew, I give you credit for kind of, you know, stimulating that thought. This was a fun discussion, and keep listening, Andrew, and send in more questions. Friends, you now have 7 books you can pick from if we play your SpeakPipe question or comment or tip on the air. We have our 4 Princeton review books, The Best 390 Colleges, College Admissions 101, Essays That Kick Apps, and Princeton Digital SAT Prep. Our 3 new editions are The Calm College Method by Lisa and Lynda Depker, paperback or Kindle, Peter Pitt's Small College Magic Kindle version, and College Unmazed has a book, Your Guide to Design and Document Your Home School by Holly Ramsey and Michelle Everett, paperback edition. Our authors have generously agreed to cover the shipping and handling. Just send your name and full address, the book that you want, and the episode number where we aired your SpeakPipe question or tip. Please send that to your collegeboundkid@gmail.com, and we'll forward your request to the authors. All right, friends, time for another Susan Brisson. She's the director of admission at Olin College. Time for part 2 of 3 of our interview and College Spotlight on Olin College of Engineering.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Susan Brisson, Director of Admission at Olin College of Engineering, Susan talks about the level of math Olin is looking for in its students, and she discusses admissions requirements. Susan talks about the individual in-person evaluative interview that Olin is so famous for. Susan tells us what some red flags are that students can have in the admission process. Susan shares who the cross-apps are with Olin. In other words, students that apply to Olin, where else do they apply? Susan explains why their application timeline differs from some other peer schools. And Susan explains what employers consistently tell Olin that they like about Olin grads. Listen and enjoy. So, Susan, I know you mentioned part of the first year curriculum, a lot of students will take linear algebra. So that makes me think, are you looking for BC Calc? Because most of the students that, that take linear algebra have already had BC Calc. Talk a little bit about what your expectations are. Let's talk about your admission process in general.
Sure.
And what your expectations are for a student and the kind of student that would be, a competitive applicant.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. We do, any student who is admitted to Olin will have had calculus and physics in high school at some level. We're always looking to see what's been available to students at their high school. And we're looking for, I would say BC Calc is kind of like it's kind of like the baseline, if you will. I think that's what we see. Some students have more math than that. That's not always better. That more math doesn't lead to higher rates of admission. But if students don't have calculus, they cannot be successful in the curriculum. And same with physics. I mean, generally we're looking at, sort of the AP physics level, but if that's not available at a particular school, we would want to see whatever sort of the highest level of physics available to them. We have admission to Olin is selective for sure, and we have a two-part process. The first part is a holistic academic review, so looking at all the classes the students taken, what level of rigor they've selected, as well as their grades. And again, as I said, through the lens of what's been available to them at their school. And then sort of doing that whole kind of academic review. And we are test optional, I should point that out. So students can submit SAT or ACT scores, will superscore, but it's not required. They don't have to submit. And the other thing we always like to point out is, I'm not going to have a long conversation about testing. I think right here is not appropriate, but in our experience, because we have a college, a project-based curriculum, there are not a lot of high-stake tests that happen at Olin. So students at Olin, they'll take a test or a quiz here and there, but most of the assessment at the end of the class is not a final in that traditional sense. So for us, the best predictor of success at Olin, academic success, is a strong high school transcript. That's kind of what we're looking for. And then beyond that, because we're a small place, we're looking to see if students are engaged in their community. And that can play out in a lot of ways. They can be in clubs at school. Some kids have jobs that they have been very committed to and they've worked hard at. And that takes up a lot of their time. Some students are really active in their faith community or in their home or in their local community. And so all those things are equally, sort of valued equally in our process. I think that it's students always assume that, I've got to be the captain of this and the president of this club. And those are worthy accomplishments. I don't want to say otherwise, but it's more than that. We're looking at sort of the scope of their involvement. And then we have a two-part process too. So that's the first part, is doing that holistic review of the application. And then we move a subset of the applicant pool forward to the second part of the process, which is an in-person for most. Come to campus, meet us, get to know us, we get to know you. It's called Candidates Weekend. And that is kind of a singular thing, I believe, in the college admission world, is that on-campus experience. But it works well for us. We get to know our applicants really well, and they get to know us really well, too.
And you have an interview, right? Does that happen during that time? Talk about the interview. I have several questions that other co-hosts have asked me to share with you.
Sure.
And one of our co-hosts said, please talk about the interview process and structure. I find many people didn't know about it, and then they feel wholly unprepared when they get there. So talk a little bit about the interview.
Yep, absolutely. So candidates' weekends are what they're called. They're 3 weekends, the last 2 weekends in February and the first weekend in March. It's a Friday, Saturday, and any student within the continental U.S., we expect to come to campus. Now, obviously, if people have extenuating circumstances or illnesses, we work with them and try to, and we do have a virtual option that for students who live internationally. So just to kind of set the stage there. And when students come to campus on the Friday, they're put in teams with other students from their particular cohort, and they get to know one another really well. They do some team bonding activities on the first day and the first morning and then the Saturday morning, I beg your pardon. And so then the interview comes on the Saturday afternoon. So it's kind of at the very end of this whole weekend experience. And every student has an individual interview with an evaluation team. And the evaluation team is made up of an Olin faculty or staff member, like somebody like me, or a faculty member, and a current Olin student. And in the individual interview, we ask students to talk about their, to kind of give us a little bit of an idea of why they're interested in Olin, kind of what we don't expect them to be experts on Olin, but we do expect them to have considered maybe why Olin is appealing to them and why they think they would be, better for having come to Olin. We ask them to talk a little bit about what they might be able to contribute to the community, because individual contribution is significant in a small student population. And then we ask them, again, generally, if they've had experiences where they've had to work on teams or resolve conflict or things like that. Those are things that we talk about in the interview. And once everybody has had their interview, we then bring those original teams of students that we created, or prospective students, back, and they do a scaffolded group exercise together. Again, and that is evaluated by the same evaluation team. So if a student comes and he's on my evaluation team or she's on my evaluation team, I would do the individual interview with my current Olin student partner, and then we would also oversee that group exercise for that particular student's group. And the group exercise, I can't tell you what the prompt is because it's like the secret sauce, right? Because we don't want students to come like with a PowerPoint or like overly prepared. But it is a design exercise. Students don't have to, do hard math problems on the board or anything like that. It's really for us an opportunity to see them in action in a teaming situation and to see. And we're also looking for potential, right? I mean, I am, again, very aware that these are 17 and 18-year-old kids, and this is a high stakes experience for them. And so we're not looking for everybody to be perfect at everything. We're looking to see, again, who's kind of indicating that they might have some good potential for this highly collaborative interpersonal experience, which is the meat of the Olin academic experience for sure.
So one of our co-hosts wants to know, what are some red flags from an admission standpoint? Let's say other than you don't think the person has the background to be academically successful. Like, obviously, we know that would be a flag. But other than that,
right? What
are some other red flags?
Yeah, I think sometimes students come and they think they want to go to Olin, but they want to study something that we don't offer, or they really want to do like theoretical research. A lot of that stuff can be revealed in the interview process. So that's a red flag. I think that students who this curriculum is iterative, so most high school students who come to us have been highly successful in high school. They haven't had a lot of experience with failure. Like most of these kids have just kind of sailed along. So students who it looks like are going to really struggle with that, because there is the need to kind of recover and get going again. I think students who are, just don't want a group experience. I mean, again, I think that becomes really apparent. It's not that they can't work with groups, but it's clearly not what they want. And I think those are other I will say, you know, there have been very few times, and I've done this a long time, there have been very few times in my experience where students have displayed an obvious red flag. Like sometimes, somebody can't contain themselves. They can't stop talking when somebody else is talking. They can't share the stage. They can't, or they're very reticent, can't kind of express themselves, can't speak up. But when we do, our community and our academic program does require students to have some agency, and we help them develop that. Again, we're looking for potential. We're not looking for a finished product. But a student who seems really uninterested or unwilling to engage, that would be a big red flag for us as well.
One of our co-hosts has found that a lot of the students interested in Olin, they're brilliant and they're creative, but quite a few are somewhere on sort of that autism spectrum. Is that something that you see? And talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't know. I mean, obviously, students share a diagnosis with us. That's something that we would keep confidential. And we certainly, but I would say, in my sort of armchair psychologist life, yeah, there are definitely students who would be on that spectrum. I think there's so many ways that plays out for people. And for students, I think, who can still express themselves. Again, it doesn't have to be, I'm not thinking about the polished presenter. I'm thinking about the student who's able to say, hey, what about this? I was thinking about this. Or turning to a peer and saying, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that. Or, I don't know about that. Can you explain that? Like somebody who's kind of open to those conversations. And that is not, that's certainly something that anybody, regardless of what their sort of background might be or their, the way their brain works, can be able to do. You're right. Students who come to Olin are really talented, really creative. It's a very cool, engaging community. And there are a lot of different types of people here. I guess that's the other thing to say. Lots of different ways to be happy and successful here.
Who do you find, Susan, that you overlap with a lot? Like students that look at Olin also look at, cross apps. Who are your cross apps?
Sure. Harvey Mudd's a big one. Rose Hellman, like a lot of the players that you mentioned before, because of our location, MIT, and a lot of overlap with, I would say, also Carnegie Mellon, Johns Hopkins, the Ivies for sure. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut. It sort of depends. Like if you've got somebody who's more interested in the design side of things, I mean, we do have kind of a liberal artsy experience. So we'll have students who are looking at, other colleges that are not strictly, engineering, if you will. And then we'll have others who are, it's us and WPI and we'll see which one comes up on the top. But Harvey Mudd's a big one. We actually cross a lot with Harvey Mudd.
Another one of our co-hosts wanted you to comment on your regular decision deadline, which is earlier than some schools. And what's sort of the rationale behind that?
Sure. It just gives us more time, right? We don't have any early pathways, early action or early decision because of that candidates weekend piece. It's just not possible for us to get an early version in, in sort of the heat of the semester. Because it does place a demand on the faculty and the students who are having an academic experience. But waiting until January 1, which had been our deadline previously up until the past couple of years, just meant that we had a very short time frame to read the applications. And reading season for anybody is demanding for any college admission team. But we wanted to have the time to do second reads on a lot of we do a lot of second reads on applications. And it's a laborious process, our reading process, because it is thorough, it is holistic, it is very careful and thoughtful. And so we thought that would just give us a little more space to do that. And it has not impacted our application numbers, which was the concern that, maybe kids would have a harder time getting applications in on time. But, so far it hasn't been an issue. So I think we might continue to do it that way.
No, well, especially a lot of those other schools also have an early option, right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, I've noticed like your graduation rate isn't as high as schools sort of that are as selective as you, right? What is it,
No,
75 to 80?
actually,
Is that
no, no,
correct or
no,
not?
no.
That's not correct?
No,
Okay.
that's not correct. I mean, well, I
Okay.
just was actually the only reason I know is I was just looking at our consumer information page the other day, and so one thing to remember is if one or two students, because our number is so small, one or two students has a disproportionate impact on our percentage.
Sure.
But we have a 6-year graduation rate of over 90, like 93%, and the 4-year rate, I'd have to look at that to see what that is. But because our process is so selective on the front end, we have really good confidence in our decisions. And I also think students have had an opportunity to really learn a lot about Olin. So they can choose us kind of with their eyes wide open. So generally, in our experience, students who leave Olin leave for usually it's like a significant personal reason. Sometimes it's like a family crisis or things like that. We don't have a lot of students leave because, they want to transfer to WPI or something like that.
What do your employers say they like about Olin grads? Like, I know you guys have a very high average salaries. I've seen that. It's like over 6 figures. And, you're very successful with job placement. What do you hear from your employers that this is what we feel we're getting with an Olin grad?
Sure. Yeah, I think Olin students are really successful in their job search. A few reasons for that. One is they have a really diverse and broad skill set to begin with. They've got strong technical skills, but they've also got all that other stuff, which makes them, I think, they have the broader skill set. I think the other piece is that they've had a lot of project experience. Most of our students will do an internship. It's not required. It's not like a formal co-op program, but highly encouraged. So most students will have internship experience. Everyone does a senior capstone experience. So they've got a lot of practical stuff on their resume, a lot of things that they can bring to bear. They are also, again, they have this opportunity to really engage in the life of the college, and that benefits them in so many ways. So they're accustomed to taking leadership roles. They're accustomed to sort of project management, scaffolding a project, asking critical questions. This might work, this might not work, and why? And they're very, very good at collaborating. They're excellent at collaborating. And I think that really comes through as they are preparing in early careers. I mean, again, one of the beauties of the small population is that we are able to maintain really good statistics on our graduates, and the feedback is very good from the students themselves too. They feel that they are engaged in work that they find meaningful. They're well compensated. They are, ready to jump into careers early on, and then later on, as they progress, they're able to stay relevant in their field. Oliners also, this is something else I didn't mention before, Oliners take a lot of responsibility in the classroom. We have course assistants. We don't have TAs because there's no grad students here, but a lot of classes will have course assistants where an older student, a student who's taken the class before, is going to serve in that sort of quasi TA-ish role, offering peer-to-peer support, right? So students are experienced in sort of teaching themselves. And I think that really serves them well in the job in the marketplace as well. You get to a job and somebody's not going to hold your hand and walk you through everything you need to know. You have to have a certain ability to think on your feet, understand what you know and what you don't know. And if you don't know something, find it out. And our students are really, really good at that.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Susan Brisson, Director of Admission at Olin College of Engineering. Hope you join us next week for the next part. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to attempt to debunk a stereotype that's very prevalent in independent college counseling circles. And the stereotype is this: applying for outside or external scholarships is not worth your time. I beg to differ. And I'm going to tell you where this myth comes from, why I disagree with it, and why there's never been a better time ever to win outside or external scholarships than right here in 2026. Then we'll have part 2 of 3 in my interview with V. Peter Pitts, author of the book, Small College Magic. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.